Battle Creek is a city where breakfast built an identity. But over the summer, an Italian chocolate maker bought W.K. Kellogg. And Battle Creek is entering a new chapter, one that is much less certain. This is In Michigan. I'm Brad LaPlante. It is Friday, December 12th. Today, we're speaking to Julie Mack. She is a lifelong journalist who wrote a 3-part series for the Southwest Michigan Collaborative. What you'll find through our conversation is how similar Battle Creek's situation is to Kalamazoo a few years ago when Upjohn, a drug manufacturer, was purchased by Pfizer. Battle Creek has plenty of challenges ahead, but residents are cautiously optimistic. Stick around, this is the story of Cereal City.
Right. And we should probably back up 2 years ago because they really bought a sliver of the original Kellogg company, realize. So what happened is 2 years ago, Kellogg, the Kellogg company, as we knew it, split into two. Okay. 82% of the company assets, everything but domestic cereal, went to a new company called Kellanova. And they moved the headquarters of that to Chicago. Okay. So it was no longer Battle Creek based, only the cereal part, domestic cereal, not international cereal. The Kellanova had, because remember, if you sort of kept track with what's happened to Kellogg over the years, they had bought up a bunch of snack brands and stuff like that. So all the snack foods, like they were like the ramen noodle brand. I mean, international cereal, all that moved with Kellanova. So that broke off from, there was some workers that still stayed in Battle Creek, but the headquarters moved to Chicago, different company. And that company was actually bought out by Mars last year. Well, they're still finalizing that sale, but Mars, the candy company that's based in Virginia, bought out Kellanova. Okay. So that part, so it's like now an international company that has, a teeny sliver of that company in Battle Creek. So you had what was left was rechristened the W.K. Kellogg Company, and that was 18%. It was a little less than 1/5 of what the original Kellogg Company. Domestic cereal, still headquartered in Battle Creek, and that company, the W.K. Kellogg Company, was then bought out by Ferraro. Ferraro is based in Italy, makes Nutella. It's basically candies and confectioner stuff, sort of snack food stuff. Right, right. The gold wrapped balls that you see at CVS or Walgreens. That's that company. And Nutella, like I said, those are probably the two brands that they're really known for. But it's a European confectioner. So they bought out W.K. Kellogg, and I think they did that to get sort of a foothold in cereal in the in North America. Okay, so they're keeping the Battle Creek operation, and that is still their headquarters for North America cereal. But the bottom line is that, for years, Kellogg had been a company headquartered, a big international Fortune, well, I don't know, Fortune 500 company, but it was a big company based headquartered in Battle Creek. And that is no more. There's no, where the top CEO, most of it is owned now by Mars based in Virginia. The other fifth is owned by Ferraro based in Italy.
So this is kind of like a company that's been dissipating its impact on Battle Creek over time.
For sure, and it has parallels to what happened in Kalamazoo with the Upjohn company. I mean, Upjohn was a company that was headquartered in Kalamazoo, and then it merged with another company. At one point, it merged with Pharmacia, and then got bought out by Pfizer, and now Kalamazoo's role in pharmaceuticals is being, a cog in a very, very internationally based company that I think actually Pfizer's headquartered in Europe, um, so it's a very different, that means the company as a, the importance of that is that when you have a company that's headquartered in, and something happens, the mayor can make a phone call to the CEO who happens to live in town and say, can you help us out with this, or what's going on, or whatever. It's very different when you're just a division of a large international company that happens to be in your town. There's that ability to make the phone call is no longer there. Upjohn was headquartered in Kalamazoo, and it was a big company. I mean, it was a quarter of Portage's tax base. It was the largest employer in Kalamazoo. It was the largest taxpayer in Kalamazoo. And at that point, in the late 80s, a colleague of mine, the Kalamazoo Gazette, said there was a story that happened to break over a weekend, and they needed comment from Upjohn. And the CEO of Upjohn was listed in the Kalamazoo phone book. And he actually called the CEO on a Saturday and got him on the phone to get the comment. I mean, that tells you the difference between, that, you would not now be able to call, if someone from the Kalamazoo Gazette could no longer call the CEO of Pfizer on a Saturday afternoon and find out what the heck was going on with this or that.
Right, and it almost reminds me of like, and maybe it's not necessarily the same, because company, everybody's so accessible now, but I have connections with like Ford, or for example, and like
Right.
just being in Michigan, I feel like helps kind of have that media.
100%, 100%. And it's not just the media stuff. I mean, people are like, so what do I care how easy it is for a reporter to get a hold of somebody? But I mean, think about how Ford renovated that old train station in Detroit. Would they have done that and that was like a billion, that was a very, very expensive project. Would they have done that? Ford it's a very Detroit centric thing. And Kellogg was like that for Battle Creek, for decades. It was, as a quote in the story said, it was the straw that stirred the drink. And there was another quote from someone in there saying, if you wanted to get something done in Battle Creek, you either had to call the Kellogg Company, or you had to, or the Kellogg Foundation on board to get that to happen. But,
So they really like
they were the two.
they really moved the city along.
They did. And there's another anecdote in the story about how in the 1980s there was a movement to have more unified. There was a Battle Creek Township and a Battle Creek City, and there was redundancies in police services and a bunch of other things. And it was like, we need to have just one. Battle Creek City needs to encompass Battle Creek Township. The township people were not really on board with it because it would have increased their taxes. The city's taxes were higher. And it went to referendum and it passed because Battle Creek said, we will pull our headquarters from Battle Creek if you don't do this. And the voters went for it. So it was because of the Kellogg Company putting their thumb on the scale that unified government happened. And you just look at a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, well, and another example, someone pointed out to me, whenever there's, one of the people I quoted in the story goes to the Battle Creek Symphony concerts. And he says at the beginning of each concert, they begin the concert by saying, does everyone who works for Kellogg, can you please stand up, because they're a major sponsor of the Battle Creek Symphony. So will that continue? I don't know. Will Ferrero give, two flips about the Battle Creek Symphony? It's hard to know.
Yeah, right. I remember growing up, like I didn't know much about Battle Creek, right? I grew up in Metro Detroit, and I didn't, Battle Creek was, God, it would have been like 50, 60 minutes away. So I didn't know much about it. I didn't drive past it. I had no connection to Battle Creek, but I knew Kellogg's was there. And that's all I knew.
Sure.
And so that, that was the city's identity, I feel like, for so long.
Oh, 100%. And I will tell you that, so I am considerably older. You're old enough to be my child, or even my grandchild maybe. But but when I was growing up, so grew up in the 1960s, and at that point they were still giving tours of Battle Creek, of the Kellogg factory. And every person I knew my age, if you lived in Michigan, even even if you lived in Metro Detroit, I mean, there were plenty of kids who got on the Amtrak train at and took the field trip to the Battle Creek, and because you actually got off at the train right next to the Kellogg factory, and you would take your tour of the Kellogg factory, and you would have your bowl of ice cream and Fruit Loops, topped with Fruit Loops at the end of it, and see how cereal was made. I mean, that was part of a Michigan kids, a baby boomers' childhood was going to the Kellogg factory and seeing going doing the tour. And sending, I don't know, when you were growing up, did they still have box tops?
Yeah,
Where
they
you
did.
send in for
Yeah.
gifts and stuff?
Yeah, they did. It's crazy that those are gone to think about it, I guess. They were kind of tapering off when I was, growing up. I was born in 1995. So,
Okay.
they
So
were still around, but
so everyone knew, but everyone knew Battle Creek, Michigan, because that's where you mailed your box tops to, and you got your, secret decoder kit or your, some cheapo toy from your box
exactly.
top.
Yeah, no, I mean Battle Creek was iconic, and I'm wondering as far as Ferraro wanting to, they've said that they want to keep the cereal HQ in Battle Creek, but are there any like commitments to that, or is it just kind of their word?
And that's the whole thing. I mean, I my experience in looking at what happened with Upjohn, and there's been some other takeovers in Kalamazoo of companies that were based here. Um, is that they'll say nothing's they buy it and they're saying, but we're not changing anything. And what they do is then they do an evaluation, and then in a year or two, you know, I mean, when Upjohn no longer was when Upjohn did its merged and was no longer based in Kalamazoo, over an 8-year period, there was just one shoe that dropped after another. You know what I mean? They moved the headquarters out, and then they laid off a bunch of jobs, and then there was a restructuring, and then Pfizer bought it, and then there were more jobs lost, and it was, it would not be surprising if they chipped away at it. I think that nothing will happen in the short term. I think in the long term, it's utterly conceivable that they would, maybe I think the thing that I would worry about most if I were Battle Creek is maybe not so much the production plants. Here's one thing that they do have going for them on the manufacturing plants, and that is they produce food. Someone told me this, so I'm hoping that this is valid. But because they produce food, you have to get FDA certifications for that. And that makes it a little harder to say we're going to close this plant and open a new plant somewhere else. But they could move cereal production. Yeah, it's easier. It's easier to stay where you are and expand there or upgrade there than it is to build a new plant somewhere. Um, and so that may stick around, but I mean, Farrell has a lot of manufacturing plants. There's nothing to say that they couldn't retool them and make cornflakes there. Um, so that's certainly possible. But what I would be a little more worried about is there is R&D in Kellogg or in Battle Creek right now. And actually, I'm a little unclear as to whether or not that's part of the WK Kellogg thing or the Kellogg. That's now part of Kellanova. But there is a food institute that does food R&D. There's about 200 employees. Someone told me with that, and those jobs I could see moving out because one of the issues, as we talked about in the story, is that you want to recruit the kind of talent you need for um, high paid, more professional, like R&D jobs. It's hard to recruit for Battle Creek. It's a smaller town. It doesn't have a lot going for it. You know,
What other parallels or differences are there between Kalamazoo and
I
Battle?
think the one issue for Battle Creek. So Battle Creek, one of the interesting things that I learned in doing the Battle Creek story was saying that the issue for them isn't. I mean, they have some other areas of job growth. So in terms of even though you're maybe losing your identity as Cereal City, they have some other things going for it in terms of job. There's a big battery plant going in Marshall. That's not that far from Battle Creek. So in theory, that should be a positive pop for Battle Creek. They have a really good industrial park that has a bunch of like 13,000 people work in this industrial park. And and there, there's a Fort Custer military base. I don't know if people outside this area are aware that there was a long time military base between Battle Creek and, well, it's actually, it's either within the city of Battle Creek or maybe just on the border of Battle Creek. Uh, right. It was a military airport, which means it has a long runway. And so that gives you what they would really like to do. The vision for that is to turn that into a center for like making drones and training for drones, and turn it into a regional or a statewide hub for the drone industry, taking advantage of that military airport.
Would that include like consumer drones, like the ones that I might buy?
Yeah,
Or are
right,
they gonna be, or are they gonna
right.
be like military drones?
No, no, we're not talking. Actually, that it's although I think the military, because there's still an Air Force National Guard that's based there, and they still use it. But I think ownership of that is now actually with the city of Battle Creek owns that airport, so they can use it for commercial uses. So yes, we're not talking about military drones. We're really, although it could be, but I mean we're really talking commercial
But
commercial drones.
mostly
Yeah,
commercial, because I'm sure that
right,
there's
right,
more in
right.
that. So I guess the question, right? It could Battle Creek, instead, shift from going from Serial City to Drone City? Like, is that a
Yeah, I
possibility?
think that's the vision. The bigger challenge for this, so that's the hope, and they have the makings to do that. They, the guy from their Battle Creek Unlimited, which would be their development agency, said the issue for us isn't necessarily we're good at job creation. What their big challenge though is getting people to live in Battle Creek. They are close enough to Battle Creek, and even when I moved here in 1990, and I heard like right off the bat, oh, people who work in Battle Creek and like all those Kellogg execs, they tended to live in Kalamazoo, not Battle Creek. It was close enough. Battle Creek, Kalamazoo had more luxury housing, more executive level housing. Um, it had more. I mean, Kalamazoo is a university town, as someone said, is one of the people I quoted. It punches above its weight in terms of arts and entertainment. It just it has the concerts. It has a lot of, it has a very crowded civic calendar because of between the university and it's just a
Yeah, that's kind of how Lansing is, right? And I just speak from experience, right? Because Lansing's very like, it's a small market, right? And but we have the university, we have the state
right.
capital, all of that stuff. So there's a lot to do here.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And so I think one of the big challenges for Battle Creek now is how do we create a place where people aren't, they want people not just to work there, they want people to live there. And how do they do that? And I think, and I mean, it is an interesting thing. Like and maybe part of it is there a way for Battle Creek and Kalamazoo to form more of a sister city alliance? I mean, honestly, they've been talking about that in the entire 3 decades, 35 years I've lived in Kalamazoo. Um, filling in more. I mean, you've seen the growth in like the Grand Rapids area where Ottawa County is now really part of the larger metro Grand Rapids area versus, Holland and places like Grand Haven and Holland and, are almost really suburbs of GR versus separate entities. And you could do that in Kalamazoo where you would fill in the eastern part of Kalamazoo County. Battle Creek actually is right on the border of Kalamazoo and Calhoun counties. It's in the north west corner, and so if you could fill in these communities like Gull Lake and Augusta and Galesburg and things like that, where Comstock, where it's more there's more stuff there, and the communities had more of a tighter relationship versus a turfdom where there's not a joint vision at all. I mean, they really are more competitors than they are forming an alliance. So
Interesting. And you mentioned in the story too Battle Creek's media landscape. And I guess it's not quite a media desert, but it kind of leans towards that, right? Because they
It's
have.
pretty, I'll tell you, actually, so here's an interesting little point. This was actually part of a package of 3 stories that I did for the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative. I should give them a shout out, which does extend into Battle Creek, and MLive, which it has based in Kalamazoo for that part. It does not have a stake in Calhoun County. It has one in Kalamazoo. But so this was because I did one on what's happened to Kalamazoo since Upjohn left 30 years ago, and then one on philanthropy in Kalamazoo, and then this story on Battle Creek. And the Battle Creek one actually got the most readership. And I think part of that is because I think that there's been so little coverage of what's happening in Battle Creek that, yeah, people were like, yeah, I know something's been going on with Kellogg and Battle Creek, and I don't know what's happening exactly, and no one's really reporting on it because there just isn't a lot of media there anymore. So it did. There was actually someone said that was one of the challenges that Battle Creek has, is that because it's a it's semi-desert, news desert, getting out the good news of the thing, even when they are trying to improve the quality of life in Battle Creek to make it more attractive as a place to live. How do you get the word out about that when there's not really a robust newspaper or a TV station there based anymore, or a local news radio station? That part of this is not just the reality, it's also the perception of Battle Creek. And if it changes, how are people going to know that?
I don't think that people necessarily realize that, because if I get a press release from, say, the governor, right, the governor's doing a
Right.
housing project in Lansing, and we cover Lansing and Jackson,
Mhm.
and if the housing project is in Grand Rapids, I'm not going to cover it. Or if it's in northern Michigan, like, I'm not, because that's not really our DMA, that's not our market
Right.
area. So
Right.
so if Battle Creek has something going on, like, how are people going to know if nobody's reporting on it?
Right. And I'll say, I mean, Kalamazoo definitely has a more robust media market than Battle Creek, but we MLive. I do not know. I did not know a lot about Battle Creek. When I was started to report this story, I knew a lot of the backstory for the other 2 stories because I've reported on them through the years as a MLive journalist. But um, Battle Creek, it's not that far away, but I don't know a lot about it. You know, I would say the idea that that the people in Battle Creek really viewed their biggest challenge as, how do we get people to live here? I mean, like I said, I had long heard uh, that, people who, the higher paid professional employees um, in in Battle Creek tended to live. And when I say Kalamazoo, I mean Kalamazoo County. I mean, you saw a lot of Kellogg executives living in the Gull Lake area, which is Kalamazoo County. It was not the city of Kalamazoo. And in Portage, that would be another one, and the Mattawan School District too. So within the county, but it would be, so the fact that they viewed that as a challenge was sort of interesting. I also did not realize how, a fun little factoid, that actually breakfast cereal, this is the birthplace of breakfast cereal in the United States, the breakfast cereal industry. Um, so that was sort of a fun story, of how, you know, th- there was the Seventh Day Adventist sanitarium. This was long before it was holistic. I mean, it sounds like something you would have sort of now for people who had nervous breakdowns. And a failing businessman who had a nervous breakdown came to Battle Creek to recover. His name was C.W. Post, and they had this homemade cereal that they served at the sanitarium, and he uh, went from being failed businessman with a nervous breakdown to wildly successful because he founded the Post Company and created a company to produce grape nuts. And grape nuts was the original product. There was a second one too, but and it was based on this food he'd eaten at the sanitarium. And then the the Kellogg family actually ran that sanitarium. And when Post became successful, that's when they were like, whoa, we should do cereal too, manufacture our cereal too. And that was the birth of the Kellogg Company of cornflakes.
Yeah, and the story of Kellogg is fascinating. And I know, and I'm wondering too, just to, maybe to kind of wrap up, what does it look like for Battle Creek going forward? Like, where do they go from here?
Well, I went to this economic forum that they had last month, and the mood was one of cautious optimism. And I will say that was not misplaced. I think that Kellogg had been sort of, you know, this was not unexpected, and there's been Kellogg was already reducing its footprint in Battle Creek, so they had been preparing for this. I do think that the drone vision is something that they've been working on for years and is a long-term plan. I think the Blue Oval factory that's happened in the battery factory in Marshall is something that's very exciting for them. I think that their downtown has gotten better. It's still, not still a work in progress for sure. But they've had some projects downtown. So I think cautious optimism is not misplaced, but I also think that the Cereal City, this is really sort of the end of the era for their Cereal City days, and their identity is definitely in transition, but it's not a dark future right now. I think actually for years Kellogg, there are things on the horizon. I think that's good.
That was the story of Battle Creek and its next chapter. Have a great weekend. On Sunday, check out my other show, The Moment. This week, I will share my interview with U.S. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan to talk about the year behind and the year ahead. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.